Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of My Bigfoot Sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland roads where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to mybigfootsighting.com.
My Bigfoot sighting was in 1997. My name is Myron Patak, and I'm from South Dakota. And right now, this prior year, I'm 61 years old, and my sighting of Bigfoot was back in September 15th of 1997. And it happened up on Gavins Point Dam, South Dakota. Started bow hunting with my brother back in 95. And the colony, which is called Bonhomme County Colony, Tabor, South Dakota, up on Gavins Point Dam on the South Dakota side. My family was the only ones that were allowed to hunt the land. And they had like 35,000 acres of trees, wooded area. And if anybody knows anything about the colonies, there's Hutterites, Mennonites, and each person has their own job title. And the ones that we became friends with, what they call them, the cattlemen or cowmen, they're in charge of all the cattle that graze the hills. Now, the hills were pretty overgrown with trees. You had walnut, and you had acorn, and you had spruce, and you had poplar, all kinds of trees. And in these trees, when you go hunting, they had a lot of pack of coyotes. They had big cats, mountain lions, cougars, same thing, bobcats and lynx. So we became good friends with Reuben. He was one of the cow guys. And there are certain things that they cannot do. There's certain beliefs and religions that they're not allowed to do. Well, they would introduce us to some of their ways, and we would introduce them to some of our ways. We became good friends. But through the time of hunting, we would hear all kinds of stories. We'd talk about the big deer, the buck that they would see, how big the racks were, and so forth. And it started getting a little deeper into discussion, and we would talk about the coyotes and the big cats, anything that was out of the norm. And they would tell us about, sometimes they'd come across a cow, a young calf, or a deer that basically they'd find dead. Basically, it was just ripped apart. And anybody that knows, if you grew up in the country, in the woods, coyotes and big cats can't do that, especially the way that they had described what they had seen. And whenever we'd go, we'd have to get back out of the hills before dark, because the pack of coyotes and stuff were so thick. And when we're down there hunting and going through all this thicket, every once in a while you get the feeling that you're being watched. You don't know from what. Over here in that area, there are no bears, so we don't have to worry about bears. Basically, it's just cats and, the coyotes. In 1996, over in Santee, Nebraska, over on the reservation, there was a lady that was hanging some clothes out online, and she had witnessed what she calls a Bigfoot at the edge of the trees watching her. So anyway, she had reported it to the tribal. Well, word got out to the news, and it was all over the news, that there was a Bigfoot sighting over in Santee. Well, along the Gavins Point Dam, in the wintertime when the lake would freeze over, animals would crisscross from one side to the other. You would have coyotes, cougars, deer crossing back and forth. Where I had witnessed my Bigfoot sighting was not too far up on the dam from Santee. Santee was across the lake. So my brother and I were scouting 2 weeks prior to September 15th, 1997. We were scouting a place to put up a tree stand. And I come across this big thicket of cedars, tall cedars. And I thought, well, if I can get one of those big trees, that'd be great. So I started working my way into this big grove of trees, these cedar trees. And I had to get down on my hands and knees and crawl in. And at that time, we had a rifle just for protection and so forth, cats and coyotes and stuff. So I had to crawl in on my hands and knees underneath the branches of these cedars. And I got to the middle of this big grove of cedars, and there was an open spot about 8-10 feet in diameter. And I found it really strange because there was nothing in the middle of this, except for it looked like a bed of branches just laying there. And as I looked up the trees, the branches weren't cut. They were not cut with a saw, and they were not tore off, by antler shed, when the bucks and so forth, they start to rut. It was none of that, because there's no way a deer could have got in there with the antlers. What happened was these branches were ripped off the trees about 10 feet up. Now, if I stand on my toes, I can reach 8 feet. And these branches that were ripped off are 2 feet higher than that. And when you rip a branch off, it kind of pulls down the bark. Well, anyway, I started thinking about that sighting the year prior of that sighting of the Bigfoot over in Santee. And I started getting this weird feeling that I was in somebody's home. And so I yelled at my brother. He came over there, and he crawled down under there too, just like I did. And I asked him, I said, what do you think did this? And he said, well, it's probably a deer. I says, there's no way a buck could have got in here. There's no way. And so I said, look at those branches. I said, they were ripped off, and they're laying in a bed. So we left, and we started scouting more land and so forth. And that was on my mind a lot. Well, then we'll move ahead 2 weeks after, which would have been 15th of September. And again, my brother and I were the only ones who had the authority to go in on that property. All of those acres of trees, 35,000 acres of hills. And so we drive down to the bottom just to make sure there's nobody there. And this was at 3 o'clock in the morning, 3 a.m. So we just wanted to make sure there's nobody around. We came back up, and I got out, opened the gate, and we drove up into the hills. There's no houses that are even close. Now we're driving up there in the pitch black. We get up on top of the hill, we back up, and we're facing to the south. On the other side, you can see from the glow of the sky, you knew ahead of you was Gavin's Point Dam. We were up on a high point. We back up into the cedar trees. And so about 4:15, I get out of the truck. My brother stayed in the truck because it was kind of cold out, and he had fell through the ice years before, and he got frostbite, so he couldn't handle the cold very well. So I get out, and I walk about 60 feet over this little bank in front of the truck where I lost sight of the truck. And I brought myself down beside this little 4-foot cedar. Off to my left, about 75 yards, was this big patch of cedars where I've seen, or I thought I witnessed a nest, which in relation to the Bigfoot. So I'm sitting there next to this tree, and it was kind of a cool breeze, and the wind was kind of going at an angle in between the deer path that was down below me that goes down to the lake. Now, about 4:30 in the morning, I noticed the sun started to give an orange glow on the Nebraska side. And then it could start making out the ridges of the Nebraska hills. And then a few minutes later, you could start seeing the glow on the lake. And then you could kind of make out the image of the hills on the other side. But it was still too dark for anybody that was out there without a flashlight to know where they're going. I mean, it was still that dark. And so I'm sitting there and I'm waiting and I'm looking, just with my eyes, because I don't want to make any movement in case any deer came down on that trail. They headed down to the lake. So as I'm sitting there and I'm just watching the glow come up, and I can start seeing the ridge of the Nebraska hills. And the cedars that were in front of me down below where this goes down to the lake, I could start making out the image of those trees. And then all of a sudden, off to my left, now at this time I did not have a rifle. I did not have a phone, did not have a camera. All I had was my knife and my bow. And off to my left, something caught my attention. And about 35, 40 feet from me on that trail, this thing stood upright. It was not a deer. Well, again, we don't have bear. It wasn't an elk. And it was not a person in a ghillie suit. The slope of the ground where it went down, I got the upper portion of the upper torso to the top of the head. This thing walked right down into the pitch black. And I got it perfect. I couldn't see his eyes or anything. I just got the silhouette of this huge body walking in front of me, walking right down into the pitch black. I was sitting beside this little cedar tree, and I had some camos on and so forth. And I was perfectly still. And I seen that thing, and I tell you what, my heart started racing. And I thought, oh my God, I got to as soon as this thing is out of sight, I got to get back to the truck. So it just as silent as could be, it walked right down in front of me, right down into the pitch black, going to the lake. And I figured it was going down to the water. As soon as it disappeared, where I couldn't even see it anymore, I got up as quickly as I could, and I backed up for the first 10 feet. And I turned around and I ran back to the truck. And usually I'm pretty careful with my bow and stuff like that. At that point in time, I didn't care. I threw it in the back of the truck. I got in the truck and I looked at my brother and said, "We got to go." He said, "Why?" I said, you don't want to know what I just seen?" I said, "We got to go." So he started the truck. And as we got down, he said, "Well, we got to shut the gate." I said, "I don't even care about the gate. Let's just go. I'm not shutting no gate." I locked the door in the truck. And we left. And I'm just sitting there. I'm just quiet for about the first 3 or 4 miles out of there because it was all heavily wooded on the roads and stuff. And I thought, for sure, we're going to see something else cross the road. So we got out of there, started going down the road where we were in the clearing. And I finally spoke up and told him what I saw. And I had to remind him, I said 2 weeks before, I said, "You remember that spot in the cedars where all them branches were tore down? And you thought it was a deer." I said, "That was no deer." I said, "Remember the year before that lady spotted a Bigfoot across the lake?" And he remembered that. And I said, "Kevin," I says, Kevin's my brother. I said, "I know what I saw. It was not a man in a ghillie suit. It was, I know what I saw as a Bigfoot, and I seen the upper torso." Well, I didn't never, ever, ever go back in the dark down to that spot. I went out there one day. It was several months later. I went back there. It was actually September, October, November, December. It was probably 5 months later. I went back, and that little cedar was sitting there. And I remember seeing the trail where that thing walked down. I looked to the left where the cedars were. And I remember kind of marking that thing with the trees. Kind of give me a ballpark of how tall this thing was. And as we sat there and I looked at it and I focused, I remember, the markings that I kind of visualized, and we figured it's probably between 7.5 and 8 feet tall. And after that, I never went back. I do not bow hunt in the dark anymore. Basically, I gave that up. It scared the daylights out of me. I know what I saw, and I respect it. And I have not told very many people about it because they think you're crazy when you start talking about it. And they start asking you, well, why don't you ever see? Why don't you ever find their bodies and this and that? I can't answer that. But I do know what I saw. And there's nobody in this world going to tell me any different. Growing up, here's another fascinating story. Before I jump to that story, the place where I seen this Bigfoot, okay, so DNR and Corps of Engineers made an agreement with the colony because they wanted to open up their land for more hunters. So after the colony made the agreement that they were going to get paid each month by the Corps of Engineers and DNR for allowing hunters to come in, the sad part is after they signed that, the following year, they had 3 other colonies come in and they wiped out every tree on every hill. Now that the hills are basically bare, they're starting to slip because there's nothing to hold the soil. But all of that vegetation, they pushed out the big cats, the coyotes, the deer, and obviously this creature, the Bigfoot that I have seen, moved on. Where, I could not tell you. But I'm pretty sure that if the lakes froze that year, I'm pretty sure that it went back across the lake because on the Nebraska side, there was a lot more cover. And so I'm pretty sure that's where it went back to. But jump to another story. When I was a kid, about 7 or 8 years old, we had met some people in Hill City, South Dakota. And he was kind of like a grandfather to me. He went by his nickname was Frenchie. His actual name was Clarence, but he went by Frenchie. Looked like an old mountain man. Well, anyway, he worked for the forestry. And he had told me stories about different things, from Montana when he worked up in the high country. What they did was they went in and they did fire lines. It's where they clear strips in case there's ever a fire. And so anyway, he had told me about a story where him and one of his fellow workers were up in the high country on a dozer. They were doing fire lines, taking down trees. So there, if there was a fire, it had a void there. And during lunchtime, when they get done, they just go and lay down on the logs that they stacked and take a nap over the lunch hour. And he said that, when you're out there on the dozer, you're way out in the middle of nowhere. Something is watching you. He said this particular time, he said it was really eerie. He said after they got done at lunch, during lunch, they parked the dozer, and it was all fresh dirt from the blade, and they go and lay on these logs. He said when they got up, they went back to the dozer. He noticed these huge human-like footprints coming from the trees, came up to the dozer, got up on the dozer. You could see he said you could see where it got up on one side, and it got down on the other side and walked off into the trees. And it wasn't too far from where they were sleeping on this pile of logs. And he said another thing, he said up on the ridge, if you look at the top of the mountain, he said there was a silver object up there. Kind of looked like a Silverstream camper. He said there's no roads up there. There's no way that anything could have got up there. It wasn't a weather balloon. It wasn't an airplane crash. But he said it was sitting up there on the edge of that mountain. And he said they watched it for a while. And he said then after that, it was gone. And so if you stop to think about the stories that you hear about Bigfoot and the sightings, sometimes you also hear, and you hear about sightings of UFOs about the same area. which takes me back to another story when I was growing up over in South Sioux City, Nebraska, where I grew up back in the 70s. There was a lot of stories about sightings of UFOs. And I remember one night in particular, there was a lot of sightings around the area. My dad and my brother were coming home. They seen this cigar-shaped type thing in the air, and it landed back behind our place about a mile in the trees. And they went back there. They couldn't find it. Well, shortly, I think it was like the next night after that, my dad was outside doing yard work, and he came in. It was just before dark. And he said, "Do you hear that? All the dogs in the neighborhood are going crazy." And so we all went out and listened. And every dog in our neighborhood, every one of them, like if a siren goes off, a dog starts to howl. These weren't howls. These dogs were going like barking like crazy at something. They could sense something. Well, anyway, that evening, somebody called in. It was on the news that they spotted a Bigfoot coming through our neighborhood. And somebody followed it. And they said it got over to the Missouri River and crossed the Missouri River into Iowa, which would be over by Sioux City, Iowa. Well, at the same time, with these UFO sightings, Bigfoot sightings, about in the same time frame, over near Emerson, Nebraska, we had some old friends that lived over there. There was a storm one night. A farmer noticed that he had a bunch of cattle laying out in the field. Thought maybe they got struck by lightning. Now, there's no tracks anywhere. There's no fresh tracks of vehicles on the roads, nothing. But every one of them cattle were dead. They were drained of blood, and they had parts that were cauterized, removed. And you see some of that. You watch some of these shows on TV, and that's basically the same thing. There was no explanation. They thought maybe it was a bunch of kids playing, pranks, going out killing cattle and so forth. But there was no tracks or nothing. This was during the storm. So you stop to think about the Bigfoot sightings, and then you start to bring in the UFOs. The UFOs and the Bigfoots all have something in common. Now, why people can't find them, I can't explain that. But I know what I've seen, and there's nobody going to change my mind on what I saw, what I felt, and the things that I have seen and remembered growing up, and some of the stories that were told to me, from Frenchie, along with some other UFO sightings. So it is real. I can't talk anybody into believing it unless you actually been there, unless you actually seen it and witnessed it, like paranormal. I have had that experience as well. So why I'm chosen to witness this, I don't know. When I first seen it, the Bigfoot, I was scared, but then I come to respect it because there's a lot of unanswered things out there that we can't explain. But there's a fascination now about it. So every time I go anywhere, Minnesota, wherever, you start to think. So now every time I go out, if I'm in the wooded area, it's like, hey, let's go out and see if we can hear some knocks. There's a fascination about it, and there's kind of a fear factor side of it too. So I can't explain why I seen it, why I experienced it, why I experienced paranormal that I have in the past. So I am honored that I was the one that was chosen to see what I seen at that time. And so now I'm sharing my story with a lot of you because that's something I've never really let out. A few people I had told, they told me I was crazy. So I kept that all in. And now I'm sharing it with you. So I hope this kind of gives you something to think about and keep your eyes peeled when you're out and about, because to me, they are real. They do exist. So thank you for listening to my story. And I hope you take it to heart. because they are out there.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown, no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves and the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah, the sound of a memory brings me back to the bluegrass playing on my dad's 8-track. His pickup man had been through it, getting through the day on Scruggs and Skags, booking eight bales to those Tennessee jams. There's no other way that I'd do it. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Something coming backwards and double time, getting to the soul and the drumming low Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Drives me wild. The only tune is the cars rushing by, with the bass on the stereos booming. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Something going backwards and double time, getting to the soul and the drumming low Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Backwards and double time, getting to the soul and the drumming low Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm, ride chicken porch swing, mama's best sweet tea kind of sound.